studios of Creative Conversations with Dr. C. You are entering the studios of Creative Conversations with Dr. C.
Welcome to the conversation.
Hello. Welcome to another edition of Creative Conversations with Dr. C. I am Dr. C. I am so excited about tonight's conversation. As I indicated last week, this is the month that we're going to celebrate our beautiful women of not so much of color, but just women in general. And tonight's conversation is one of those conversations that must be had. So tonight, I am going to introduce you to a wonderful, wonderful individual that I have met and I've known for the last couple years or so, maybe more than that. And she is an interesting woman. When I tell you she has a story to tell and some history to go behind it. So if you want to sit down, get you a pen and piece of paper, because she's going to teach us some stuff about somebody she loves dearly, which is her grandfather. So before I get started, I just want to let you know she has an impressive resume. When I tell you this woman, it comes from the Fisk University. She was one of the only female on a tennis team, which was phenomenal to me. But she has a lot that goes along with her. But I don't want to tell it all. I just don't want to tell it all. I am going to let her tell her story in her own words. And then we'll get this conversation started about preserving legacy, which is the legacy that we want to leave, not for this generation, but the next generation. So without further ado, I am going to bring on my beautiful friend, Jolynn Johnson Smith.
Hey, good evening.
Hello, beautiful. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderful. I was just telling the audience that we are celebrating Women History Month, and what better way to honor you, Miss Jolynn Johnson Smith. I was telling them about preserving legacy and about your legacy that you're going to teach us tonight about a phenomenal man, which is your grandfather. So I want you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the conversation. Like I was saying before, it's just an organic, authentic conversation that we're going to have, and hopefully we'll be able to teach some people about the legacy of your grandfather. So go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, first, I want to thank you for inviting me to do this. It's always an opportunity to share a story with people that they may not have been aware of. So I am originally from DC, Washington, DC. I grew up in a family of physicians, tennis players, and athletes and educators. And there were 5 children in the family. I'm the oldest of 5. And we were fortunate enough to spend every summer in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is where our grandfather lived, who was the first, I will say, the first physician. He was able to get hospital privileges back in the late 50s for African-American doctors to practice medicine in the hospitals. Before that, they could not do that. I guess, maybe they were delivering babies at home and certainly couldn't do surgeries in the hospital. So I remember him coming to Washington in 59 to take a class at Freedman's Hospital, which is now Howard University Hospital, to allow physicians, Black physicians, to be able to go into the hospitals and do surgery and deliver babies. Anyway, my grandfather is someone who was known for running a 3 decades tennis camp at his home in Lynchburg. He built a tennis court back in the, I'm going to say the 30s. and wanted to have some form of exercise that was amenable for him because he used to be a football player at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And he decided, I mean, that's a pretty rough and rigorous sport. So he decided to build this court and then join forces with the American Tennis Association to bring in as many of the top tennis players across the country as he could to play during the summers at his home tennis camp. It's kind of like a boot camp, something that some of the other pros or coaches started, many years later. But he is most known for having taught Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe among the first two most prominent. He is also, again, his coach over 200 African American and some non-African American students. And I think the most interesting thing about his his life was that he was able to identify the only male who's ever won Wimbledon, the U.S. Open, and the French, and a female long before Arthur, who won the U.S. Nationals, which is now the U.S. Open. She also won the French and also Wimbledon. But he did this stuff at a time when Black people were not able to play the country club circuit, were not able to be included in these competitive tennis tournaments. And it's just a remarkable story to me because as he worked and did his thing, he joined forces with people to, I say diplomatically, my son doesn't like for me to use that word, but he did this in a way that was non-threatening to others. He collaborated, he coordinated things. He was able to get these players to play on the NCAA in some of those tournaments, play on the courts. University of Virginia would not let African Americans play in the tournaments that they would have there. So he befriended a man that allowed him to bring his team of people there. And I think the first time that he brought them, they lost, but they were still great players and good athletes. And so as a result, Althea accomplished what she accomplished. And she really came along at a time when African Americans, period, were really not given the opportunity to make, she did not make the kind of money that these young women are making now. The money that Serena Venus, Coco, Naomi Osaka, she was not making that kind of money. And I think there was a bit of bitterness for her down the road. She also did not have a sports agent. When Ash came along, he and other people were able to have sports agents that represented them legally and were able to get them to invest their money in things that would ultimately make them millionaires. And so it's just such an exciting story about how did this guy do this? And I would say to you that he did have his family, he did have his circle of friends, he did have his community that it was able to help him. And so during the summers, he invited certain kids there. They came and played, spent the whole summer. He paid for their entry fees in tournaments. He paid for their clothing, the rackets, and tennis shoes, and also just provided them an opportunity to play on that court. And in doing so, this is how they hone those skills, by playing from sun up to sundown. He also had a strict guidelines on how they were to conduct themselves.
Right.
You could not curse. You could not bang your racket on the court. None of that stuff. You had to conduct yourself, because when they would go out and play these matches, he wanted to make sure that everyone was above board. He also wanted to ensure that if there were close calls on the court. This is long before you've got, they call it Hawkeye, that where the machine equipment can tell you whether the ball was in or out.
Right.
Long before that, he, made sure that if a ball was questionable, if the opponent hit a ball to you and you thought it was out, he wanted you to play it as if it were in. That was just to create this perception of fairness. He wanted to be fair. He wanted them to play hard, but play well. And so the other things that, resonate for me are that some of these kids couldn't afford college. So he ensured that they were able to get scholarships to school. There was a guy across the street who's still around in Lynchburg. He and another guy from Lynchburg went on to, they were accepted at Johnson C. Smith in Charlotte. And Melvin went on to become a doctor. He was like the medical director of some healthcare facility in Charlotte, and then moved to Richmond later and took over at a place here in Richmond. And the other guy, Elmer, who was from Lynchburg, well, they were both from Lynchburg, but Elmer went down there. It was his doubles partner. And I think Elmer must have gotten homesick or, wasn't used to being away. And he came back home, and I'm not sure what he did for his career. But I think the interesting thing, Melvin was related to Dr. Vivian Penn, who was at the NIH. She was the first African-American woman, I think, who took on, a role at the NIH up in the Maryland, DC area. And so the thing about
for the audience that doesn't know what NIH stands for, if you can tell them so they can understand the dynamics of that.
Sure. National Institutes of Health. It's a very renowned place, just like Duke, just like Johns Hopkins, just like Mount Sinai, Cedar Sinai in Los Angeles. So I think Melvin must have had a little bit more foresight and saw the advantages of doing, what he did. And he was very successful, a successful physician. In fact, 2 of his daughters became doctors. But one of the things that I will note about the majority of the players there, they may not have become tennis pros, but they did use this sport as a social mechanism to help them get wherever they landed. And many of them became lawyers, judges, doctors, ophthalmologists, dentists, architects. I mean, I could just run down the names of, a lot of these guys, and they were able to get fantastic careers out of learning this sport. I think, for me, it taught us how to strategize, how to be analytical, because if it's you and one other person on the court, you have to know where to put the ball so that they can get to it. And it's just like a lot of things in life. We have to learn to maneuver and strategize and juggle. How do we become successful? What makes us successful? And I think that was one of the things about tennis that I came to appreciate and understand, and my grandfather was a big proponent of going to college, furthering your education. He went to Meharry back in the 30s, I'm gonna say, or maybe the 20s for that matter. But the decision that I chose to go to Fisk, which is in Nashville and across the street from Meharry, was because I knew that he had gone there. And they had a women's tennis team and they had a men's team. And because I had played competitively for most of my younger years, when I went to college, I didn't want to play on the girls' team. I wanted to play with the guys. So I have been the only female that played on the men's tennis team at Fisk University. And it's funny. I have a friend that will tell me, oh, I saw your picture in the gym. They have this picture that they took of us. And I had my hair tied in a scarf. I had these socks pulled up to my knees. And every time I see that, I'm like, oh my God, what was I thinking? Why why did I have
Mhm.
those socks on like that or the scarf? But
Mhm.
back then, I wore my hair in a natural. So
Mhm.
I don't know, I would just put a scarf on. But
Mhm.
that was I made sure that I competed well enough to be able to travel with the team. I was one of the top 6 players. And
Mhm.
coach would not let me go too far because I was the only female. He said the only matches you can go to were if he were traveling with the team.
With you. Mhm.
Yeah, so there was an occasion where we traveled to not Florida. We traveled to Alabama. We played Alabama A&M, and the very first guy that I was supposed to play refused to play me. He said, "I'm not going to play her," and so he
Mm.
didn't play me. Then they connected me with a different guy. Well, I played him and I beat him, and he
Mm.
was very gracious about it. But the other guy probably figured that I might, you know,
Beat him.
beat him, and
Mhm.
he just was
Mhm.
like, "I'm not playing that girl." So I mean, it was
Mm.
funny, but it boosted my ego a little bit.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
yeah, but
So, tell the audience, what is your grandfather's name? We didn't even say his name. What is his
did
name?
not. His name was Dr. Robert Walter Johnson. From originally, his family actually settled in a little place in North Carolina called Plymouth, North Carolina.
Mm.
It's on the
Okay.
eastern shore, kind of
Yours.
close to the water. And but he moved to Lynchburg because there was an opportunity to be one of the first Black doctors there. And
Mhm.
so he was well respected in the
Mhm.
community. He
Mhm.
was he was a lifetime member of the NAACP. He was also an Omega,
Mm.
Omega Psi Phi fraternity. And he was someone that he did a lot in the community, a lot of
Mhm.
civic minded things. And when he passed away in 1971, and that was the last summer that we were able to spend there with him, because every summer our parents would take us to Lynchburg, and we were happy to get away from DC because
Mm.
he had a yard, he had the tennis court,
Mhm.
we could roam around, the
Really?
grounds and stuff. In DC,
Mhm.
we didn't have that
That
experience. We
freedom.
were in a townhouse, and so
Mhm.
anyway, uh, he passed away, and then many years after after I started reading all these articles about his accomplishments, I
Mhm.
decided to get his house on the National Register of Historic Places, which was
Mm.
a process, but it was a good exercise in writing about what his contributions to the community were, and
Mhm.
really internationally, because
Mhm.
he made sure that these first 2 African Americans, excuse me, and Ash still is the only African American male who has won any of these Grand Slam tournaments. So it's
Mhm.
really, alarming that nobody else has. I mean, people have come close, but they haven't done it.
Right.
So I got his house on the National Register of Historic
Mhm.
Places. Um, and after that point, and I work very closely with people here in Richmond at the
Mhm.
Department of Historic Resources, but we did a celebration around the 2001 time frame, when they were getting ready to do they have a plaque, and the official,
Mhm.
I don't know what they call it, I can't remember what they call it, but the official doc metal piece that has all of the information up there
For the house?
for the house.
Mhm. Okay,
And
yeah.
so in 2015, well, let me back up to 2009. So in 2007, my younger brother had been copied on. My grandfather got an it wasn't he wasn't an invitation to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, but the Hall of Fame people have to vote him in. And
Right.
and in 2007 they did not. And so when they were sending my brother the decline, that Dr. J didn't make it,
Mhm.
they copied the entire board and plus some of big name players on this email. So my brother took the opportunity to draft an email to them and really kind of chastise them in a nice way to say, how dare you not induct this man when the first two African American players, they were both inducted long before my grandfather. So, with that being said, in 2009, he was officially voted into the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, Rhode Island. And I had the pleasure of going there. They give you a table for 10 people, but because our family was, kind of sort of big, we everybody couldn't go. So I went. I would have liked for my husband and son to go. My brother and his wife and the other brother and his wife went, and we got Ash's widow, Jeannie Ash, to go ahead and introduce my brother, to speak to the acceptance speech. And that is out on YouTube. So his first name was Lange, Lange Johnson.
Okay.
And every time I look at that speech, I get teary-eyed at the end because he mentions that Ash and Althea and another kid, there was another young man that lived next door to my grandfather that really would have been the next Arthur Ashe. He beat John McEnroe in the National 12s and National 14s in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And my grandfather would haul these kids to Kalamazoo. He'd take them to Knoxville, to these were USTA, United States Tennis Association tournaments. He would drive them. My brothers would sometimes go, or anybody, that qualified. And even the winter that I left Fisk, I spent 3 semesters there. My parents picked me up and they drove from DC to Nashville, and then we drove down to New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl tournament. And these are big tournaments. And so, some of the stories that I've heard over the years from my brothers, because my sister and I really played locally more than we did. We didn't do a lot of those big trips. We'd go up and down the East Coast. But my brother told a story about them being somewhere. It had to be in a southern city. And they were in a hotel one night and somebody put an axe through the door, just took an axe and stuck it in the door. And basically were saying, you all need to go home. You don't need to be here. And so, stories like that. And then there would be stories where when Ash and those guys were playing, they would show up at tournaments and they would be told, Dr. J would be told, you all were late. They defaulted them so they couldn't play.
Wow.
Which was hardly the truth because he knew to show up early for these matches. Right. And then there was a story about one of my brothers playing somebody and the kid, and this might have been at the Sugar Bowl, the kid was sweating so much, he decides to go to the locker room and take a shower. They let him go in the locker room and take a shower.
Wow.
Come back and resume the match. My brother, I think, was winning the match. And, stuff like that would kind of play with people's heads. So he ended up losing the match, because he just couldn't keep it together. But these are some of the challenges that they faced as they traveled and went to these tournaments. And, I credit my grandfather for being able to do, the accomplishments that he was able to make on behalf of integrating the sport, because these are just tremendous things to overcome.
Of course, I would agree, especially when you're talking about a man that started off in the 20s,
right,
and had the fortitude to say, I want to do something different with my outcome in life. And if I can give back, if I could reach back and help somebody else, then let me do that. Not only just as a doctor, but just having the fortitude to say, look, I need these kids to do something productive. And it allows them to see what discipline looks like. It sounds like your grandfather was no joke. It's like, look, you here on time. If you're not here on time, you're not playing. It was just a whole big to do, because first off, we're African Americans, we're
Mhm.
in a predominantly white sport. And so we have to come accordingly because they're going to be looking for anything that they could to say, nope,
To
they're out of here,
keep us out. That's right.
Exactly. So I truly see the discipline in that. So you said that you played as a young girl.
Mhm.
What tips did your grandfather give you that allowed you to get where you were, to have the fortitude to say, I'm going to go over here at Fisk. I'm not playing with these girls. I want to play with these boys. What kind of conversation did you have with your grandfather about that?
I don't think I recall conversations as much as I observed what
Mm,
was going on, because
mhm,
I think he was more focused on what the guys did, what the
mhm,
John Lucas from Durham played in at his camp one summer. Um, Guys that ultimately went to Hampton Institute, Hampton University,
mhm,
played at his camp. Um,
mm,
there were guys from the West Coast and, like I said, all over the country. And
mhm,
so, just hearing him, he you could not smoke. He didn't want people smoking. And I think that, when I just would observe his expectations, it was that people would be on that court all day. They also had chores. He was a big hunter, and
mhm.
he raised Weimaraner dogs. He was kind of a guy before his time, because what
Okay.
black man do you know that had Weimaraners? These were dogs. They almost looked like greyhound. They were gray dogs, slender
Mm,
dogs, but he would use them to hunt with. And he
mm.
also had a dark room in his basement where he took photographs and he developed the pictures himself.
Wow.
So it was more of the fact that we knew he had expectations around a code of conduct about how you
Mm,
conduct yourself. And we the other kids that came there to play were the ones that spent more time on the court. We kind of would sneak on when
mhm,
they took a lunch break, or if they had chores to do, because he would make them keep the kennel cleaned out, and he would also make them keep that tennis court. It was not it was a clay court, so they had to
mm,
roll the court, and he had every bit of equipment that, there's a machine called the ball boy machine, and you load it up with tennis balls, and it
mhm,
shoots the balls out at you sporadically. And
mhm,
so we you know they took advantage of that. We took advantage. But again, I
mhm,
think it was just knowing, and probably conversations at dinner, knowing what he expected us to do, or what he
mhm.
expected them to do, applied to us as well.
Music,
And
okay.
again, we were very careful not to uh, you know, get him upset. I tell you one story. One of my brothers was banging the racket on the court and probably out there cursing, and somebody heard him and told my grandfather. So my grandfather put him on a Greyhound bus back to DC, called my dad up and told him, he said, "Oh, he'll be arriving at such and such a time. Pick him up at the bus station."
Oh,
And just
wow.
sent him. He wasn't even a teenager, but he sent
Mm,
back home to get, I guess, to think about it and
mhm.
get your attitude together.
Right. But I guess that, again, that's the discipline that carries with you for a lifetime.
It
Those things
does.
up through observation allowed you to see exactly what was meant and what you had to do. Because again, during that time, we were already in segregation. We were trying to fight everything, and we had to make do with what we had. But as you said, your grandfather was truly ahead of his time with
Mhm.
being able to have that notion to say, look, this is what we're going to do, and I'm not backing down. I know how to do what I need to do to get these things accomplished, and eventually these will happen. And so being able to have an Arthur Ashe, and in that mix, and still Arthur Ashe is well known. People, I still see it, like when I look at Serena and Venus, and I'm like, there was people before them, and
Absolutely.
you know, and
Absolutely.
and so this is the story that people need to hear about your grandfather, because
Mhm.
without that, how would we have known about Arthur Ashe?
Right. Now, there
You
were
know,
two women in DC. They were sisters,
I
and
remember them.
one of them beat Althea. I'm not sure if she went to FAMU. She might have. Althea graduated from Florida A&M,
Mm-hmm.
and she played against this woman. Peters was her last name.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were growing up, we used to go play. She played at this park in Georgetown. Georgetown, DC used to be all black at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if people know that, but
Mm-hmm.
they played at this. We would go there and play at this park in Georgetown. And these women were very eccentric. I don't think the sister was alive when we played, but the one of the sisters was there all the time, but very
Mm-hmm.
eccentric characters. And so but it is well documented that she beat Althea, played
Mm-hmm.
her in an ATA match and beat her. But going back to what you said, what did my grandfather say? I think the biggest thing for me, and it's not so much that he stated it, but it was that we don't give up. We could not give up. He didn't give up in pursuit of the things that he wanted to accomplish. And he
Mm-hmm.
wasn't a maniac about how he did it
Mm-hmm.
at all. He was very cool, but people knew when they called him Doc, or we all called him Dr. J. We never called him Granddaddy, but they knew when they saw him. I would remember hearing people say, "Uh-oh, here comes Doc," and it
Mm-hmm.
just, people would just stop in their tracks. But he exemplified professionalism. I mean, even
Mm-hmm.
if he wasn't playing on the court, he'd be out there in the heat in a suit and tie, doing his thing,
Mm-hmm.
talking to people, and he was a deal maker. He was
Mm-hmm.
a deal maker.
It's just a level of respect. When people see him coming, it was just a level of respect, and he earned that respect, with all the things and the contributions that he's given to Lynchburg. Um, I know this program, it talks about the art of the
The
swing.
swing.
And so when I say that to you, what does that mean to you? What does that resonate in your mind? What does that mean to you, the art of the swing?
I think it's more, to me, more about being able to maneuver through situations, whether it's a work situation or this sport that we've learned to love and
Mhm.
and play. And so there was an art to it. I mean, you had to know how to be able to get on the court and perform. If you
Mhm.
wanted to be successful. Growing up in DC, we did play country clubs. We didn't belong to the country club, but we did play at a lot of country clubs up there. And we
Mhm.
were playing with people like Harold Solomon. He was another big pro that went from Silver Spring, Maryland to
Mhm.
his family moved to Florida. And I would always play his sister. She was in my age bracket all the time. The first time we played tournaments, it was, you're going to play Barbara Solomon. Every first round match that first year was Barbara Solomon. The
Mhm.
next year, every second round match was Barbara Solomon. I could not win because
Mhm.
Barbara Solomon. And
Mhm.
I don't know if they had a court at their house. I mean, certainly they belonged to one of the clubs up there,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
they ended up moving to Florida. And
Mhm.
um, and so, it's just, these are names that only people in the tennis industry would
Will
know.
know.
But
Mhm.
the art of the swing is, how you were able to maneuver, how you were able to excel, how
Mhm.
were able to do things that maybe the average person, couldn't do.
Right.
Excuse me, I know there are people that love the sport, but they
Mhm.
can't play the sport. But I think when you know how to play the sport, things that I think about, when he says, there's no profanity will be done on this in this space.
Mhm.
I think that you think about that in the course of a business environment. No
Mhm.
profanity at all.
Mhm.
People do lose it. People lose,
Mhm.
but it's
Mhm.
taught you how to conduct yourself a certain way.
Right. The discipline. The
Yeah.
discipline. And I think too, as you were saying that, I think too, when you have that foundation, that precedes what you are used to, and then you see a difference when you go into a workplace and you be like, well, how are they making it? And
Exactly.
these simple things that we think about, no profanity, come on time, be professional. You get people in the workplace now, you be like, well, what
Oh
happened
yeah.
over here?
Yeah.
Some simple things that you can do every day. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in a workplace. It's just in your everyday life,
In general. Hmm.
hmm I would agree. Everyday life. So as you have transformed and you now have left Fisk and you have decided to go into whatever that career, what was your master's in at
So my major in radio and TV and masters in mass comm. So I moved out to Los Angeles after I finished at Howard, got my undergraduate degree first, and
Mhm,
then moved to LA and lived out there for a couple of years. And I did work for inner city, the last radio station I worked for, because I worked for two, but the first one was just not a good fit. The job was more accounts payable, and that is not my forte. So
mhm,
I got it. The last job I had was with Inner City Broadcasting out that was out of New York, but they bought the station I worked for. And that
mhm,
was fun. It was exciting to have been there. And but then I ended up moving back home to DC,
mhm,
and I lucked into this job at NBC television, radio, and corporate. So I worked in the three different divisions of NBC for 7 years. And
mhm,
during the time that I was there, I decided to go back to school, get a master's because they paid for it. I started getting bored in the job that I did. So I went
mhm,
back to school, got a master's, and then I ended up, I wanted to stay with NBC, but I wasn't able to. I'm kind of impatient, so I wasn't able to get a job that I wanted to do at that point, and
mhm,
I just started applying for jobs outside of DC, and I
mhm,
applied for three jobs, three radio sales jobs. Two were in Richmond, one was in Norfolk, and I never. The day that I set these interviews up, I the Norfolk people said, you're not going to make it down here because I had things too tight. It was the first interview was with a station that had TV stations, and they own WRAL in
oh yeah,
Raleigh. And I
mhm,
was think my mindset was that I'll take this radio job if I get it, and then down the road I can move into TV. I could do
mhm,
something in that arena. And so the day that I was scheduled in Richmond to meet with the general manager, she could not meet with me. And what happened, her mom was dying and she had to go be with her mom. So
mhm,
that canceled that one. And then I interviewed for a station in Petersburg, but their sales office was in Richmond. And I interviewed up here in Richmond, and then they had me drive to Petersburg, which was a lot.
mhm,
And so I had to call the Norfolk people and say, I'm not going to make it down here.
mhm,
So anyway, worked for the radio station for a while, and the market here was very, very, I would say, not in favor of diversity. Let me just put it
mm,
that way. So I
okay,
ended up after about 11 months, I quit, I resigned. I had saved some money, and I said, I'm just going to find what I want to do, figure the next.
mhm,
So I did get a job at Philip Morris. I worked for Philip Morris in a supervisory capacity for 4 years, and then met my husband, and we got married, and a couple of years later we had our son. And then, I mean, I have worked in a lot of different industries. So I've
mhm,
worked in communications. I've worked in, for a big Federal Reserve banking organization, and then I went to back to another GE business that came to Richmond and stayed there for a good amount of time, and they bridged my time with NBC. So it was when I got laid off there, I ended up uh, just started thinking about what do I really, what should I do? What should I focus
Mhm.
on? Because that was during the financial crisis. And I
Mhm.
thought, where are the jobs going to be? And it's always going to be healthcare, education, or city, state, and local government. So I ended up subbing for a while. I did long-term sub assignments. I which ultimately led me to I was subbing, about to complete a long-term assignment, and I just happened to see a job on Indeed for a recruiter because I had done recruiting at Genworth for a recruiter at Vanderbilt in Nashville, and I'm like,
Mm.
okay, I like Nashville. Let me check that out. So they hired me as a contractor, and then 2 months later they hired me permanently, and I
Mm.
was recruiting for them. But then this is pre-COVID. My dad passed away, and I decided, I had left my husband in Richmond here, but it was kind of a commuter thing for a while.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
that was a tough commute because they didn't have Amtrak going back, east.
Mhm.
So I ended up coming back to Richmond, and I took another job for about 9 months. And then I started thinking again, okay, what else can I look at? And
Mhm.
as much as I love the communications industry, I decided, to stick with healthcare, which
Mhm.
landed me at Duke, and it'll be
Mhm.
7 years this October that I've been with Duke. So I, have recruited for a lot of different areas there, and
Mhm.
I'm just fortunate for the opportunity because I feel like that's where I excel, but I also feel like I excel in a lot of other areas too.
Mhm. So as you went down your resume, how does that tie into your upbringing? How does that tie into the art of the spring?
Getting the education piece. I got when I left Fisk, I was probably out of school for a little bit of time. And, my dad was like, you are going back to college. So I took some classes at DC, it was DC Teachers College at the time. And until I could get into Howard. He was the tennis
Mm.
coach at Howard. So he had
Mhm.
a friend in admissions, and she's like, oh, you got to get those grades up before you can get it into Howard. So I
Mhm.
did get into Howard in January of 75. And, it was that path of complete the education, which is what my grandfather would have wanted. This
Mhm.
is going to help you in the long run.
Right.
And then really putting some forethought around the type of jobs that I wanted to work. I mean, I
Mhm.
knew radio and TV were the area, the field of study. But one of
Right.
the things that my dad said to me is, you go to school for certain things, but you may not end up in that
In
profession.
that field, yeah.
So, radio and TV is very competitive. I never really had the desire to be in front of a camera.
Mhm.
Although there are times when I feel like I missed my opportunity because I
Mm.
could have done it. I don't think I wanted to do it as much as other people.
Wanted to do it, wanted to,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. I can.
But I think that getting the education helped me because I was interacting with a lot of different people from all over the country, all over the world. And
Mhm.
then when I finished, I had an opportunity to travel to Europe a couple of times. And I felt like, I went from Paris to Milan, no, went to Paris, Switzerland, then Milan, Florence, Venice, Rome, and then up to Amsterdam. And I think those experiences also lent themselves to, you can do what you want to do.
Mhm.
Of course, the trip was a gift to me, but the thing is, I when I was in high school, I would say, I'm going to be independent. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to travel the world. And then I'm going to get this job. Didn't know what the job would be, but I'm going to
Mhm.
get this job, take care of myself so that I don't have to depend on my parents. And that's ultimately what I did. And
Mhm.
moving to Richmond, I would say, was probably not the most opportune place for me.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I had some opportunities at Philip Morris. um, I had opportunities, learned from some of some of the opportunities became
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, working for certain organizations. But
Mm-hmm.
it taught me how to stand up for myself,
Yeah.
and this is what the art of the swing is: learning and standing up for yourself and
Yeah.
being able to execute what you want for you.
Yeah, and I think that that in itself is what we want to teach the next generation.
Hmm.
Regardless of the hurdles that you have to go through, you have to stand in purpose and understand what your purpose is. And if that purpose is to say, look, A, B, C, D, I'm gonna get to D, E, and F, but I did it on my own accord. I did it the way I
Hmm.
wanted to do
Right.
it. And so that art of the swing allows us to understand that it might not work for everybody, but it worked for me. And so as we almost come to the end of this conversation, we got a few more minutes, but what would you tell your younger self if you were to go back and as you look over your life and all the things that you've experienced with the education, with the growing up with your grandfather and just being a sibling, what would you tell yourself, the younger self, uh, if you could do something different? What would you have done differently, or what
So
not?
I don't know that I would have done a lot differently, but one of the when I write these things about my grandfather, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
looking at something that I'd written, he was a quiet warrior, but he was
Mm-hmm.
tenacious and resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a confidant, he was a coach, he was a
Mhm,
mentor, but he was insightful and intuitive. And I think
mhm,
that, when you grow up, you learn to be intuitive. You may not know it right then, but then sometimes you do. I
mhm,
think I was always smart enough to be able to keep myself out of situations that I didn't need to be in, for sure.
mhm, mhm,
But there is that, there's a certain amount of respect that you gain, and people either revere you or they don't. And
mhm,
I think people respect people that tell the truth,
mhm,
and I guess I'm faulted sometimes for being too direct and all of that. But I just don't feel that you help yourself or
mhm,
help other people when you can't be that honest warrior, if you will.
mhm.
And that's one of
Sugarcoat
the things
stuff.
that I think, my grandfather and his aunt and my parents,
Mhm,
because I would say stuff, when you're in high school, you're like, well, that's not fair.
mhm,
There was an occasion where everything I asked them, could I do? The answer was no.
mm,
And I would cry about it, and then I'd get over it. But
mhm,
the thing is, if they let me do everything I wanted to do, who knows what I would have, how I would have turned out. So I think there
mhm,
was a protectiveness, but I also think that we have to learn to accept no
mhm,
as a reality. And I
mhm,
think that helps you along the way when you are in these jobs
mhm,
where the answer is no some of the time. And
mhm.
it just makes you be a stronger person.
I would agree. I would agree because sometimes no is the fuel that you need to do something a
Yeah,
little bit different.
yes,
You know.
yes, correct.
So as we look at the state of Tennessee tennis right now, what would you think your grandfather would say about what we're seeing in tennis today?
It's interesting. I mean, I think there are things that he would be happy about. He would be happy about the fact that so many more African Americans are playing. And
Mhm,
and again, there was never a doubt that we weren't able to excel. We
mhm,
excel in whatever sport. Basketball, you look at these
mhm.
basketball teams. I mean, are they predominantly African American?
Yes.
Um, tennis. But the other thing about tennis, is that I think there would be things he'd be disappointed with. I think tennis could be farther along for African Americans. I
Mhm,
think that the USTA could potentially, create some kind of consortium to help people out that don't have the funding to travel, because traveling, I mean, these guys travel all the time. They're going from one country to another,
yeah.
and you get sponsorships for the clothes. My
Mhm,
grandfather paid for all of the clothes that these kids were, clothes, tennis rackets, shoes, fed them free of charge. He had people, friends, relatives in Lynchburg that would allow them to stay at their house, and they would help him take these kids around. But I think, again, a lot of it is disappointment about that things weren't carved out a little bit better for those individuals who did not have the means to
be able to do it,
to play like every other people that do. You got a couple of billionaire daughters out here playing. One girl's father owns the Buffalo Bills. The other one, he owns some clubs in the Charleston area. I think, again, that's not our life per se.
Yeah.
But, I think I'm fortunate that at least they instilled, my parents and my grandparents instilled certain values in us, get the education, although I was not always the best student, but I still managed to, I think I buckled down for grad school, but get your education and get a great job. I mean, my father had to give up going to medical school to come back to DC and take care of his family. He was almost 3.5 years in Switzerland. But, you've got to do what you need to do. And so there were 5 of us, and my mother was with my father's mother trying to, help us along. And we were all stair steps. So, you have to sometimes reinvent yourself. Sometimes, and I tell people in this recruiting game, you got to have plan A, B, or C. Because if plan A doesn't work, what is plan B?
Yes.
And then if plan B doesn't work, what is plan C?
Yeah. And might have a plan D too. You never know.
Yes, correct. So we have to constantly be on our toes and thinking about how we can do better and how we can get to the place where we've set these goals for ourselves.
I totally agree. I also believe that destined is what you plan it to be.
I agree.
And so if we plan and understand that some plans do fall through, and again, that plan A, plan B, plan C is what we need to have in our back pocket. And even though it's in our back pocket, doesn't mean that you have to sit on those dreams. You have to be the one that says, I am going to get out here and I'm going to do what I need to do to make those dreams come to fruition. So that being said, tell us a little bit about the foundation, because there is a foundation.
Yes. So my younger brother started the foundation in 2015. It's called Whirlwind Johnson Foundation, like the funnel, a whirlwind. And he, created, it's a 501c3. It was created to help us restore the home and tennis court in Lynchburg and try to continue the legacy of my grandfather. And so back in 22, he passed away from ALS. And 6 months later, our treasurer passed away from COVID. So all of this stuff just kind of dropped in my lap in 2022. It's been, an upheaval for me. But we were able to get a $100,000 grant from the National Trust. And one of the white females that played in Lynchburg, who was the partner of Sally Ride, the astronaut, she also gifted us $100,000. So we have been able to get a new roof put on. We've gotten new gutters. We've had a lot of carpentry work done to the exterior of the home. And now I'm about to embark on getting the 24 windows, and maybe 20 before we get the basement, but 20 windows in this house restored so that we can get it painted and kind of get things up to snuff, and then work on getting the interior. And the thing is, we need complete HVAC, plumbing, new electrical, because the house was built in the early 1900s. So it just needs to have
a lot of work.
Yeah.
So tell the audience where they can go to get this information about this foundation at.
Sure. If you go to www.whirlwindjohnson.org, there are tons of pictures from back in the day. Bobby Riggs played on that court, and that's the guy who played Billie Jean King in the Battle of the Sexes. Plenty. My grandfather took all of these, pictures and things. And my brother found photo album upon photo album in there. But this is where the photos are. This is what tells his story. This is it shows what we have done from that point forward. And we participate, I try to get out there and network with people in Lynchburg and other places. We participated in Juneteenth last year. One of the nonprofits up the street, there's a 2-block span of African Americans in that historic Pierce Street district. That Ann Spencer was a poet, the first Black librarian, but she was connected to people like W.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes. They have pictures, Adam Clayton Powell up the stairway, up the wall, in her house. And her son across the street was a Tuskegee Airman, one of the first Black aviators in Lynchburg. So we've partnered with the Pierce Street Gateway. They do an event. This will be the 3rd year party on Pierce. And what I do, I have invited the Johnson Health Center, which was named after my grandfather. They have opened up clinics throughout Lynchburg and Amherst County and here, all around. And we get them to come set up their mobile unit. And then we participate in, and I bring kids from Richmond. There's a team, a friend of mine teaches through Richmond Tennis Association. He brings his kids down so they can play on the court. They have activities, music, and it's a fun day. It's a fun afternoon. And also to highlight the story, let people know about who he was and what he did.
And it's interesting when you just said Johnson Health, I just saw something about Johnson Health like a couple days ago.
Oh, wow.
Literally. I was like, wow, that makes sense. So tell the audience, what are you doing next? What's on the agenda next for you in the next couple of months?
We're always in a constant fundraising mode. Let me just say that, been trying to get some more grants, but, because of the current state of affairs, we have to be creative about how we go about it. So people donate to there's a link to donate on our website, but we're working, everything we're doing is in phases. So we're about to embark on the windows because they are old wooden windows. And I'm going to tell you, I've had quotes from people for $4,000 a window to fix. I mean, some of the windows aren't in the worst shape. We have a new architect that is very forward thinking, but the windows are going to be what we work on next. And then after that, we will try to get the house painted and then move to the inside so we can get the floor. The floors are in great condition. He had a basement and there was never air conditioning in this house. So we got to get a complete HVAC. We'll make things ADA accessible. And I want to have a mini museum in there, but also make it open to the public so that the public can either rent out office space or, do some things where they take advantage of the house, have programming for kids on the court. I've been working with the USTA to get, we're working to get another National Junior Tennis League program. After my grandfather died, tennis died. Public tennis in Lynchburg was kaput. There has not been through Parks and Rec. I've talked to them. I've talked to the pros at one of the clubs, the university that my son attended there, Randolph College. I've talked to their coaches. I'm doing everything I can to get people on this tennis court.
So it sounds like we need to help her out, audience. We need to find ways to fund this. We need to make sure that this legacy does not die. We need to make sure that there's places for kids to go who want to understand the discipline that comes with tennis, but we also need to make sure that we're doing and giving back. So audience, please go out and visit this website and donate. If it's not financially, donate your time. If there's time where you can give, whatever you can do, that's what we need to provide to Miss Jolene Johnson Smith. This is something that is is needed. We need every opportunity for kids in intercities to be able to have a place to go to call their own. I know we talked a little bit before we got on the program. You're getting ready to do something with the museum, I believe. Did you say
Oh,
you?
yes, the Black History Museum here in Richmond is
Mhm.
doing an exhibit until June the 12th for about Arthur Ashe. And I was fortunate enough to share some photographs of Ashe with my grandfather and Althea, and Ashe and Dr. J at Battery Park with Juan Farrow, who was the kid next door that would have been the next Arthur Ashe. And
Mm,
so they have been so good to me, and have put that out there. So I am going to speak on April the 11th. We're going to do a lecture and a Q&A, and then they're going to have an activity for the children in
mhm,
at another in May, so that we can decorate some tennis rackets. And throughout the time, we've been able to get Wilson Sporting Goods, and the USTA has donated the mini tennis rackets for little kids that,
mhm,
want to learn the sport. So we're going
mhm,
to do a little decorative exercise with the tennis rackets. And
mhm.
and so I'm looking forward to that, because it keeps the story out there.
And give them the time and the place again for the
Okay.
April 11th event.
Black History Museum in Richmond, 101 Lee Street, Leigh, and it is from 2 to 4, April the 11th.
Okay, so if you guys are in the Richmond area and want to partake in this phenomenal story about her grandfather, please go out and show the support for her. Again, if you're able to provide financial toward this foundation, whether it be that or even your time, please go out into the foundation and look at the history that we have right here. Literally, we're 4.5 hours. I'm in North Carolina, you're in VA. So much history is there, and you're talking about party on
Party on
Pierce.
Piers. It's a lot of fun. I mean, they have volunteers. Everything they do is orchestrated. I get the Johnson Health mobile unit to do diabetes and blood
Mhm.
pressure checks, and they sit out there all day long and
Mm,
help us. I also have arranged for a fire truck to come. The fire department comes, and they will do some, training and coaching of
mhm.
these adults and kids.
Yes.
And I get my buddy to bring the kids down for tennis, and they
Mm.
they just have a blast out there.
This
And
is amazing. This is
yeah.
amazing work. This is amazing work. This is why it's so important that we speak at whatever platform you have to teach
Mhm.
people, because I wouldn't have never known anything about your grandfather. I mean, so close. I've been to Lynchburg. I've been to
Oh,
Lynchburg
wow.
when I worked and helped open up a facility at one of the organization that I work for. So right in Lynchburg, would have never known
And
about
it's
this.
so interesting. I mean, I bump into people. I had a carpenter go over there recently to put a new lock on the door, and he said, I used to live down the street. And I was telling him, I said we were there in the 60s, so that dates me. But the thing is, I meet people all the time that,
Yeah.
I never knew that. And it
Mhm.
needs to be taught in the schools. It needs to be something that, I mean, I had a TV station in DC reach out to me 2 Black History Months ago. They just happened to, I don't know how they found my grandfather, but
Mhm.
they interviewed me, talked about it. I mean, things like that just get me excited, because
Mhm.
when I do these events, and I will get the press, I will have the press out there as well.
Mhm.
TV station, newspaper.
Mhm.
I met a reporter from the News Advance, and and he came and did another story about us. So
Mhm.
everything that we do, everything that we can make happen, and look, and I'm working pretty much full time.
Mhm.
So, I have to do stuff. I'm off on Fridays. I just make it happen.
Yeah, but the good thing is you're not letting that legacy go to the
I'm not.
wayside. You're
I'm
making
not.
sure that the legacy of your grandfather lives on even after you decide to pass it on the baton to somebody else. We want to make sure we keep this in the forefront for people to know that this is a living legacy that we want to make sure we spotlight. And I am so grateful that you took on the invitation, Ms. Johnson Smith, to come onto the platform to educate us about something so important like this. But also, even in this month of March, where we're celebrating women the whole month. We should celebrate ourselves all the time. It shouldn't just be just March. But I am so grateful that you had the opportunity, or gave us the opportunity, to listen to this story, because most people wouldn't have never known about this. But again, I am going to keep on plugging this, and I'm going to put it out on the social media platforms to make sure that this April 11th date, people come out and support what you're doing. Support the foundation, give, whether it be financially or just through donation of your time, making sure that people are aware of what's going on in Lynchburg, and keeping all that together and keeping it alive. So, did you want to have, and do you have any parting words before we end this beautiful conversation?
I would just, thank you for the opportunity to, share this. I don't talk about it as much. I mean, as I should, but people that know me know that I am really passionate about this. It is hard to raise money. I'd love to have an exhibition match there, on that court. And I've had other opportunities. The USTA had me speak at their centennial celebration a couple of years ago, which was wonderful. I shared pictures, just had that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
The whole event was sold out. And Francis Tiafoe was there at the table next to me. And so, to be able to share that space and to meet people. We went last year to the US Open for Althea's 75th anniversary of winning the US Open. The person that runs her organization, and I, collaborate. And so I just say that, yes, we have to preserve the legacy. Yes, it's a great story to be told. And during segregation, I'll leave these parting thoughts. My grandfather opened his home to people like Duke Ellington, Roy Campanella, Jackie Robinson, Marian Anderson. And when he died, there was a condolence book that had Duke Ellington's name signed in it. He probably sent some flowers. Now, I know he wasn't at the funeral, but it just, to learn all these things about him after he died, and long after I had finished college, was just so, when I learned all the stuff he did, I said, there's no reason why I shouldn't be doing more to preserve the legacy. So we have to take, these are serious, but interesting and exciting things to know.
So I guess my last question to you, and before we end this, have you guys decided to maybe write a book about this? That's the next thing.
Actually, my brother Bobby is writing a book, and it's been. Remember, I asked you at one point who did you have a publisher? Because he's had a couple of snafus with publishers. And so I happened to read an article in the Lynchburg paper about a woman, actually the woman whose daughter is going to do the windows for me, shared the story about her being a publisher. So I reached out to her, friended her on Facebook, took her a while to, get back in touch. And I got her number from somebody. And I said, look, my brother's writing a book about my grandfather. Well, really, it's Dr. J in conjunction with Ash and that time frame. I said, are you able to help him? And lo and behold, he's working. Like, as my husband says, he's been working on that book for as long as I've known you. So, again, it's a huge opportunity. So I think things are moving in the right direction. But I'd love to do a pictorial, because we have so many pictures that I'd love for those to be exhibited in some type of pictorial book.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk offline about that
Okay.
aspects of that. But again, I just want to tell you, thank you for this
You're welcome.
amazing conversation, a history, really history, and something that we should always want to I always tell my kids, knowledge is power. Once you know this, nobody can take this away. This is living history on this podcast tonight. So I thank you for taking the time to share that piece of your life with us. And hopefully the world will be able to see it in a picture, whether it be in a picture book or just in a book itself. But I just thank you for taking the time out to have this conversation with me tonight. And my parting words to the audience: remember, you are loved. I always say this. Please check on the people that you think are strong, because they might not be. We're still in this mindset of being in COVID, and a lot of these people are still sheltered and they don't know how to get out of their own way. So take the time to pick up the phone and say hello. If you can't pick up the phone, go by and see them. Check on them to make sure that they're alive and they're well. And also remember, you are loved and that you have a story to tell, and be the one to tell your own narrative. Don't let anybody else tell it for you. So without that being said, I'm going to say good night from this conversation. And again, Ms. Johnson Smith, thank you for taking the time to share your light, your vision of what you want to see this legacy of your grandfather to be. So until next time, again, I said last time we were going to do this every Thursday for the month of March, and I will be posting who will be that next person for next week. But again, thank you so much for taking the time out to listen to this conversation. And until next time, we'll say good night.
Thanks, Dr. C.
No worries. Anytime. I'm going to have to bring you back eventually. I don't know when that eventually is going to be, but we're going to come back and have another conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of Creative Conversations with Dr. C. I hope today's conversation inspired you to think deeper, move intentionally, and continue creating with purpose. Remember, your voice matters, your story is valuable, and your creativity is powerful. Until next time, keep creating, keep evolving, and keep showing up as your authentic self.